A mother of 5 moved into a remote countryside house she had just inherited, but on her very first night, someone knocked on the door, even though no one knew she was there. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but sometimes the things that save us don't feel like luck. They feel like something else, something quieter, something that was already there, just waiting. That's exactly what I kept thinking about when I first heard Lena's story. Because on the surface, it sounds simple. A struggling mother loses everything. And then, suddenly, she's given a second chance, a house, in a quiet countryside area. Enough space for her 5 children. No rent, no pressure. If you heard that part alone, you'd probably say the same thing most people would. Finally, something good happened to her. But the truth is, that's not where the story begins. Lena didn't grow up believing in second chances. She grew up believing she was one of life's mistakes. Her mother, Marina, never planned to have her, never wanted her. And even though Lena didn't understand those words as a child, she understood the feeling. Distance, coldness, absence. When Marina disappeared completely, Lena was left with her grandmother. Now, you might think that would make things better. It didn't. Her grandmother fed her, clothed her, made sure she went to school. From the outside, everything looked normal. But love? That was never part of the arrangement. No hugs, no "I'm proud of you," no warmth. Just quiet expectations and occasional sharp words that stayed longer than they should. You should be grateful someone kept you. I've always thought something about that kind of upbringing leaves a mark you can't easily see. It doesn't break you loudly. It reshapes you silently. It teaches you not to expect too much, not to need too much, and most dangerously, not to believe you deserve more. Then Lena met Daniel, and everything changed. Slowly at first, then all at once. He wasn't extraordinary in the way movies make people seem extraordinary. He didn't sweep her off her feet with grand gestures. What he did was something much simpler. He stayed. He listened. He noticed things. And for the first time in her life, Lena didn't feel like she was too much or not enough. She just felt seen. I think that's why she trusted him. Not because he promised her a perfect life, but because he made her feel like she finally belonged somewhere. They built a life together. Not a rich one. Not an easy one, but a real one. 3 daughters came first, each one filling their small home with noise, chaos, and something Lena had never experienced growing up: warmth. Later, they had twin boys, 5 children in total. It sounds overwhelming, and it was. There were days when money barely stretched to the end of the week. Days when exhaustion sat so heavily on Lena's shoulders, she could barely think straight. But even then, there was laughter. There were shared meals. There were quiet nights when Daniel would sit beside her and say, "We're okay." And somehow, she believed him. Then one day, everything stopped. No warning, no slow decline, just a phone call, an accident, a road, a moment that changed everything. Daniel was gone. I want you to really sit with that for a second, because this is the part most people rush through when they hear stories like this. But this is where Lena's world actually collapsed. 5 children, no income, no support system. And just when it felt like things couldn't get worse, one of her newborn sons was diagnosed with a serious heart condition. A condition that required surgery. Expensive surgery. The kind of surgery that doesn't wait for you to figure your life out. I remember thinking, when I first heard this part, how does someone not break?
Not emotionally, because of course she did.
But physically, logically. How do you wake up the next morning and keep going? Lena did what people in impossible situations often do. She didn't think too far ahead. She just focused on the next hour, the next task, the next need. Food, clothes, medicine. Survival became her entire world. Dreams, plans, those disappeared the moment Daniel did. And then, just when everything felt completely out of control, the call came. A distant relative, someone she barely remembered, had passed away. and for reasons no one could fully explain, they had left Lena a house in a quiet countryside area, far from the city, far from everything she knew. At first, it didn't feel real. It felt like one of those things you hear about happening to other people. Not to someone like her, but it was real. Documents, keys, a letter, all of it waiting. A week later, Lena stood in front of that house for the first time. The road behind her was muddy and uneven. The air felt different, cleaner, quieter. The house itself was old, not abandoned, but not modern either. Green walls, a small garden, windows that seemed to be watching as much as they reflected. Her children stood behind her, tired from the journey, but curious. And Lena? She just stood there, holding the key in her hand. I don't know what she felt in that exact moment. Relief, maybe. Fear, definitely. But if you ask me, there was something else too. Something harder to explain. Because sometimes, a place doesn't feel new. It feels like it already knows you. And as Lena stepped forward, unlocking the door for the first time, she had no idea that she wasn't just entering a house. She was stepping into something that had been waiting for her all along. I keep thinking about something as Lena stood in that doorway. People love to believe that a new place can give you a new life. But what they don't talk about enough is this. You don't arrive alone. You bring everything with you. Every memory, every fear, every quiet belief about who you are. And Lena carried more than most. That first night in the house, after the children finally fell asleep, she didn't rest. Not really. Her body was exhausted, aching from the move, from weeks of stress, from months of holding everything together on her own. But her mind, it kept moving, like it didn't trust the silence. She sat on the edge of a worn-out sofa in the living room, staring at nothing in particular. The house made small sounds, wood settling, wind brushing against the windows, the faint creak of something shifting somewhere deep inside the structure. Normal sounds. At least, they should have been. But when you've lived a life like Lena's, normal doesn't always feel safe. Sometimes, silence feels louder than chaos. I think that comes from childhood. From growing up in a place where you were never quite sure what version of the day you were going to get. Even though Lena's grandmother wasn't violent, she was unpredictable in a different way. Cold one moment, sharply critical the next, and then distant again, like Lena wasn't even there. Children adapt to that kind of environment. They learn to read silence. They learn to notice small shifts, tone, posture, the way a door closes. They become careful, too careful. Lena had spent her entire childhood trying not to be a burden, trying not to need too much,
Trying not to take up space.
and even now, years later, in a house that was technically hers,
That feeling hadn't left. I think that's why she didn't walk around the house freely that night, even though she had every right to.
Instead, she moved slowly, carefully, almost like a guest who didn't want to disturb anything. At one point, she stood in the doorway of the kitchen. The moonlight filtered in just enough to outline the shapes inside. An old wooden table, chairs with worn edges, shelves filled with dishes that didn't belong to her. Everything looked lived in,
Not abandoned.
and that's a strange feeling, isn't it? To enter a place where someone clearly built a life and then just left. I remember thinking, when I first heard this part, how do you step into someone else's life without feeling like you're intruding?
Lena walked further in.
Her fingers brushed lightly against the surface of the table.
Cold, solid, real.
She exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath without realizing it. "This is ours now," she whispered to herself. But even as she said it, it didn't fully feel true.
Because ownership on paper is one thing, belonging is something else entirely. From the other room, one of the twins stirred.
A soft sound, barely noticeable.
But Lena reacted instantly. That instinct, at least, was something she trusted.
She moved quickly, quietly, stepping into the bedroom where all 5 children were sleeping.
They had arranged the beds however they could. It wasn't perfect, not even comfortable. But it was enough for the night. She stood there for a moment, watching them. 5 small bodies, 5 lives depending entirely on her. And suddenly, the weight of it hit again. Not like before, sharp and overwhelming, but steady, constant. Like something that would never fully leave. I think this is the part people misunderstand about strength. They think it looks like confidence. Like certainty. But most of the time, it looks like this. Standing in a dark room, unsure of everything, and still deciding to keep going. Lena adjusted a blanket, gently brushing hair away from her daughter's face. The child didn't wake, just breathed softly, peacefully, something Lena herself hadn't done in a long time. She turned to leave. And that's when it happened. One of the twins, still half asleep, smiled. Not the random kind of smile babies sometimes make. This one was different, focused, intentional. Lena froze. The baby's eyes weren't on her. They were looking past her, toward the corner of the room. For a second, she didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there. Then the other twin turned his head too. Same direction, same expression, and then a quiet, soft laugh. I don't know what you would have done in that moment. Maybe you'd shake it off, tell yourself it's nothing. Just babies being babies. And maybe that's what Lena tried to do. Because after a few seconds, she forced herself to move. Slowly, carefully, she turned her head, just enough to glance at the corner they were staring at. There was nothing there, just shadow, stillness, an empty space where the wall met the floor. She waited. 1 second, 2, nothing moved, nothing changed. Just imagination, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. But as she stepped out of the room and gently closed the door behind her, I think part of her knew it didn't feel like imagination. And the strangest thing? It wasn't fear that stayed with her. It was the feeling that she and her children were not alone in that house. The strange thing is, Lena didn't tell herself she was scared that night. She told herself she was tired. That the long drive, the stress, the unfamiliar space, it was all catching up with her. Because that's what people like Lena do. They don't jump to fear. They explain things away first. But even as she lay down beside her children, staring into the darkness, her mind didn't go back to the house. It went somewhere else, somewhere older. It went back to Daniel. I've noticed something about people who grew up without love. When they finally find it, they don't relax into it. They question it. They wait for it to disappear. That was Lena. Even in her happiest moments, there was always a small voice in the back of her mind whispering, "This won't last." Not because Daniel gave her any reason to doubt him, but because life had already taught her a pattern. Good things don't stay. When she first met him, she didn't trust the way he looked at her. Not because it felt wrong, but because it felt too right, too steady, too patient. Daniel wasn't loud about his feelings. He didn't overwhelm her. He didn't try to fix her. He simply showed up again and again, until one day, Lena realized something strange. She wasn't waiting for him to leave anymore. And that's when she fell in love. Their life together wasn't easy. It wasn't supposed to be. They started with almost nothing. A small place, unstable income, endless responsibilities. But there was a rhythm to it. A kind of quiet understanding. They didn't need to say everything out loud. Sometimes it was just the way Daniel would take over with the kids when Lena looked too tired. Or how he would sit next to her at night, not saying much, just being there. I think that's what real comfort looks like. Not excitement, not perfection, just presence. Their first daughter changed everything. Then the second, then the third. Each time, Lena felt something new, something she never had growing up. A sense of purpose, a sense of connection, and something else too, something she didn't expect. She became the kind of mother she never had. I remember thinking about this part for a long time, because it's easy to assume that people repeat what they were given. But sometimes, they do the opposite. They build what they never received. Lena held her children differently. She spoke to them differently. She made sure they never doubted, even for a second, that they were wanted, that they mattered. And maybe that's why their home felt so alive. Even when money was tight, even when things were uncertain, there was warmth. Real warmth. Then came the twins. 2 boys.
Unexpected, overwhelming, beautiful.
5 children. 5 lives.
5 reasons Lena woke up every day and kept going.
And Daniel? He worked harder than ever. Not because he had to prove anything,
But because he believed in something simple.
if I can give them a better life, I will. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments, stress,
Moments where everything felt like too much.
but they always came back to each other.
And then,
It ended.
just like that,
A phone call.
a voice Lena didn't recognize. Words that didn't make sense at first.
Accident. Highway. Didn't make it.
I don't think there's a way to prepare for that kind of sentence.
No gradual realization. No soft landing. Just impact.
Lena didn't cry right away.
That's something people don't talk about enough.
Sometimes the first reaction isn't emotion.
It's silence.
Like your mind refuses to process what it just heard. She sat there holding the phone, staring at nothing.
Waiting for something inside her to react.
But nothing did. It was only later, when she saw his things still in the house, when she heard her children asking questions, when the reality stopped being words and became absence,
That it hit.
and when it did,
It didn't come in waves.
it came all at once. I think that's when her world actually broke. Not in the moment of the call, but in the quiet moments after.
5 children.
One of them sick,
No partner.
no support, and suddenly, all those small, ordinary things Daniel used to do, they weren't small anymore. They were everything.
I remember thinking,
People don't realize how much someone holds a life together until they're gone. That night in the new house, lying awake, Lena pressed her hand against her chest, not crying,
not yet.
just feeling the weight of something she couldn't fix. Because grief is one thing, but responsibility? Responsibility doesn't wait for you to heal. And somewhere between exhaustion and memory, one thought kept repeating in her mind. How am I going to do this alone? She didn't have an answer. And maybe that's why, when that house appeared in her life, it didn't feel like luck. It felt like something she needed, something she wasn't allowed to question.
But if there's one thing I've learned from stories like this,
It's that the things we don't question.
are often the ones we should.
Grief doesn't give you time. That's something I didn't fully understand until I heard Lena's story. People talk about loss like it's this quiet, slow process, like something you sit with, reflect on, eventually learn to live around. But that only happens when life pauses. And Lena's life didn't. The morning after Daniel's funeral, nothing stopped. The children still needed to eat. The house still needed to be cleaned. Bills still existed. Unpaid, waiting, indifferent. And maybe the hardest part? The world didn't look any different. The same streets, the same sky, the same routine, as if nothing had happened, but everything had. Lena moved through those first days like someone learning how to walk again.
Not physically.
But mentally, every decision felt heavier. Every task took more effort.
Even the smallest things,
Like getting all 5 children dressed and fed, felt like climbing something she couldn't see the top of. I think this is where people misunderstand strength again.
they think strength is pushing forward with confidence.
But most of the time, it's just not collapsing in front of your kids. And Lena didn't collapse. Not in front of them.
But the cracks were there. Quiet, invisible, growing.
The twins were still babies. They needed constant attention. The older girls tried to help, but they were still children themselves. There were nights Lena didn't sleep at all. Days when she forgot whether she had eaten. Moments when she would stand in the middle of the room, completely still, because her mind had simply stopped.
And then came the diagnosis.
It started small.
One of the twins, Noah, was quieter than the other. Less active.
Something Lena noticed instinctively, the way mothers often do. At first, she told herself it was nothing. Children develop differently. That's normal. But something inside her didn't settle.
So she took him to the doctor. I don't know how to describe what it's like to sit in a room and wait for someone to tell you what's wrong with your child.
There's a kind of silence there that feels heavier than anything else. The doctor spoke calmly, professionally,
carefully choosing words, but the meaning was clear. A serious heart condition, something structural, something that wouldn't fix itself. Surgery, necessary, expensive, very expensive. I remember thinking, when I heard this part, how unfair can things get? Because it wasn't just the diagnosis, it was the timing. If Daniel had been there would have been 2 people carrying that weight. 2 incomes, 2 minds thinking through solutions, 2 people holding each other together. But now, it was just Lena. And suddenly, the question wasn't just, how do I cope? It became, how do I save him? The doctor explained timelines, options, risks. There was still time, but not too much. And that's the cruelest kind of pressure. Not immediate panic, but a countdown you can feel without seeing. Lena nodded through the conversation, asked the questions she needed to ask, took the papers, listened. From the outside, she looked composed, but inside, everything was breaking apart again. Because this wasn't something she could manage with effort alone. This wasn't about being strong, or patient, or resilient. This was about money, a kind of money she didn't have. That night, after the children were asleep, Lena sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of her, numbers she didn't understand, costs that didn't feel real. She tried to calculate, tried to make it make sense. But no matter how she rearranged it, there was always the same result. Not enough. I've always believed there's a specific kind of fear that comes when you realize effort won't fix your problem. That no matter how hard you try, it still won't be enough. That's where Lena was. She applied for assistance, went through paperwork, waited in offices with crying children and long lines. She did everything she could. Everything that made sense. But it was slow. Too slow. And Noah? He didn't understand any of it. He just smiled, reached for her, trusted her completely. That's the part that breaks you. Not the diagnosis, not the numbers, the trust. Because when someone depends on you like that, failure isn't an option, even when it feels inevitable. I remember asking myself, what do people do when they run out of options? Because Lena was getting close to that point, closer than she had ever been before. And that's when something unexpected happened. Not a solution, not exactly, but an opening. A call from someone she barely remembered. A voice from a part of her past that had never really mattered. Until now. And somehow, that call would lead her to the house. The same house she was now sitting in. The same walls, the same silence, the same place that, for reasons she didn't yet understand, had already begun to change everything. I've noticed something about desperation. When you reach a certain point, you stop asking why. You only ask how fast. That's where Lena was when the call came. It happened in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, if you can even call anything in her life ordinary at that point. One of the twins was crying. The older girls were arguing quietly in the corner. The kitchen was a mess she hadn't had time to clean. And Lena? She was standing there, trying to do 3 things at once and finishing none of them. When her phone rang, she almost didn't answer. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't have the energy. Still, something made her pick it up. The voice on the other end was calm. Professional. A notary. At first, Lena thought it was a mistake. Wrong number, wrong person. Because the name the woman mentioned barely meant anything to her. A distant relative. Someone from her grandmother's side. Someone she had seen maybe 2 or 3 times in her entire life. I find that part interesting. Because usually, the people who change your life are the ones closest to you. But sometimes, it's the ones you barely remember. The notary explained slowly, carefully. The woman had passed away, and in her will, she had left something behind. A house. Not money, not valuables. A house. In a rural area Lena had never been to. A place she couldn't even picture in her mind. At first, Lena didn't react, not emotionally. Not even with surprise. Because when life has been hitting you repeatedly, you start to expect everything to be temporary. Or too good to be real. Why me? She asked finally. It wasn't suspicion. It was confusion. There was a short pause on the other end. And then, there is a letter, the notary said. That changed something. Because objects can feel distant, but words are personal. Lena agreed to come. Leaving the children wasn't easy. It never was. but this time felt different. Not important in the usual sense, more like necessary. The office was small, quiet, the kind of place where voices naturally lower without anyone asking. The notary handed her a folder. Documents, keys, and a single folded letter. Lena didn't open the documents first. She opened the letter. The handwriting was uneven. Careful, but aged. She read it once. Then again. Slower. It wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. The woman, someone Lena barely knew, wrote about watching her from a distance over the years, about hearing things, about understanding more than Lena might think. And then came the part that stayed with her. If this reaches you when you are in need, then I hope this house becomes a place where you can finally rest. Rest. I don't know why that word stands out so much, but it does, because Lena hadn't rested in a long time. Not physically, not mentally, not emotionally. And suddenly, here was someone offering her that, not out of obligation, not out of duty, but out of choice. I remember thinking, how rare is that? Lena sat there for a long time after finishing the letter. Not crying, not smiling, just absorbing it. Because something about it didn't feel random. It felt intentional. The notary explained the details. Ownership transfer. Legal process. Everything was clear. Simple, too simple. But Lena didn't question it. And this is the part I think most people would understand. When you're drowning, you don't analyze the rope. You grab it. Within a week, Lena made her decision. She would leave the city. Leave everything she knew. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. The rent alone was enough to break her. The medical costs were closing in. And time was not on her side. The house wasn't just an opportunity. It was the only path left. Packing didn't take long. There wasn't much to pack. Clothes, essentials, a few personal items that still carried meaning. Everything else, she left behind. I think that says a lot about where she was mentally. When you can walk away from almost everything, it means you've already lost more than most people realize. The journey itself was difficult. Long. Uncomfortable. The roads became narrower the further they went. Less familiar. Less maintained. By the time they reached the area, it didn't feel like the same world anymore. Quieter. Slower. Almost like time moved differently there. And then the house appeared, standing at the edge of a dirt road, surrounded by stillness. Waiting. Lena stepped out of the vehicle slowly, her children behind her. The air felt different, heavier, but not in a bad way, more like full. She held the key in her hand again, the same one she had received just days ago. And for a moment, she hesitated, not because she was afraid, but because something inside her asked a question she hadn't allowed herself to think before. What if this isn't just help? She didn't answer it. Instead, she walked forward and unlocked the door. There's a certain kind of silence you only notice when you step into a place that hasn't been empty. Just waiting. That's the best way I can describe what Lena felt the moment the door opened. It wasn't the kind of silence you expect from an abandoned house. No dust thick in the air, no broken furniture, no signs of neglect. Instead, everything looked like it had been left behind carefully, intentionally. The air inside was cool, but not cold. Still, but not stale. And that's what made it strange. Because houses that haven't been lived in for a while usually feel forgotten. This one didn't. It felt paused. Lena stepped inside first. Slowly, her children followed behind her, their footsteps softer than usual, as if they, too, sensed something they couldn't explain. I think this is the part where most people would either feel comfort or unease. And sometimes the unsettling thing is when you feel both at the same time. Lena placed her bag down near the entrance and looked around. The living room opened up in front of her. A wooden table stood at the center. Chairs arranged neatly around it. Shelves lined with old books, their edges worn but clean. Nothing felt random. Nothing felt abandoned. It felt like someone had simply stepped out and never returned. "Stay close," Lena said softly, more out of instinct than fear. The children spread out slowly, curiosity pulling them forward. They moved from room to room, touching things lightly, whispering to each other. And for a moment, It almost felt normal. Almost, because every now and then, Lena caught herself hesitating, not moving forward immediately, not reaching out right away, like something in her was waiting, listening. I've always believed that we notice more than we admit, even when we don't understand it. The kitchen was the next place she entered. It was small, but organized. Plates stacked neatly, utensils in their places, a kettle resting on the stove. Again, not abandoned. Prepared. Did someone leave in a hurry? One of her daughters asked. Lena didn't answer right away, because she wasn't sure. If it had been rushed, things would be messy. If it had been planned, then why leave everything behind? That question stayed with her. The afternoon passed in movement, unpacking, organizing, trying to make the space feel like theirs. And slowly, the house began to respond. I don't mean that literally. At least, not in a way you can easily explain. But there's something that happens when people enter a space and start living in it. The energy shifts, the air changes. And here, it felt like the house noticed. The children adapted quickly. They always do. Laughter returned in small bursts. Voices echoed through the rooms. For a brief moment, Lena allowed herself to believe maybe this really was a fresh start. But then, something small happened. Something easy to ignore. One of the twins, Eli, stopped in the middle of the living room. Just stood there, looking toward a corner. Lena noticed immediately. Mothers always do. What is it? She asked gently. Eli didn't answer. He just smiled. Not at her. At something behind her? Lena turned. Nothing. Just a corner where the wall met the floor. Empty, still. It's nothing, she said quickly, more to herself than anyone else. But then, the other twin, Noah, turned his head too. Same direction, same expression. And then, a soft laugh. I don't know about you, but there's something about children reacting to something you can't see that feels different from normal imagination. Because they don't fake it. They don't overthink it. They just respond. Lena felt it again. That hesitation. That pause. But she pushed it down because she had to. There were too many real problems to deal with. Too many things she could actually control. So she kept moving. Evening came faster than expected. The kind of quiet evening you only find far from the city. No traffic. No distant noise. Just wind, trees, and the occasional sound of something shifting outside. The children grew tired quickly. One by one, they fell asleep. Lena stayed up, not because she wanted to, but because something inside her wasn't ready to rest yet. She walked through the house again. Slower this time, more aware. And that's when she noticed something she hadn't before. Details, small ones. A chair slightly pulled back from the table. A book left open, as if someone had been reading it recently. A faint scent in the air. Not dust, not decay. Something warmer. Familiar. I remember thinking, how can a place you've never been feel familiar? And then Lena saw it. Under the table, something small. Metal. Reflecting just enough light to catch her attention. She stepped closer, bent down, and picked it up. A silver watch. Cold to the touch, but not forgotten. Not abandoned. And somehow, the moment her fingers closed around it, the house felt different. Quieter. Like it was listening. There's a difference between finding something and being led to it. At least, that's the thought that crossed my mind the moment Lena picked up the watch. At first glance, it looked simple. A small silver pocket watch. Smooth surface, no visible damage. But the moment it rested in her palm, something shifted. Not around her, inside her. I don't mean anything dramatic. No sudden fear, no shock. Just awareness. Like when you walk into a room and instantly know you shouldn't speak too loudly. Even if no one told you. Lena turned the watch over slowly. The metal caught the fading light from the window, reflecting it in a soft, muted glow. It wasn't flashy, not decorative in a modern sense. But it had presence. That's the only word that fits. She pressed the small latch at the top. The cover clicked open with a quiet, precise sound. Inside, there was an engraving. The letters were delicate, slightly curved, written in a style that felt older than the house itself. To the one who saved a life, forever remembered. Lena read it once, then again. I've always found engravings interesting.
Because they're never casual.
No one carves words into metal without meaning them. Which means, at some point, this watch mattered to someone. Deeply. And now, it was here, in her hand. I think this is the moment where most people would start asking questions.
Whose was it? Why was it left behind? Why here?
But Lena didn't. Not right away. And I understand why.
Because when you've been overwhelmed for so long,
Your mind doesn't always reach for complexity. Sometimes it looks for something simpler, value. She turned the watch again, studying it more carefully. The weight,
the craftsmanship,
the condition.
it wasn't hard to realize this was worth something. And that thought led to another, money.
I'm not saying it was selfish.
It wasn't.
It was survival.
Because when your child needs surgery, everything becomes a number.
Everything becomes a possibility.
I remember thinking how quickly meaning changes depending on what you need. To someone else, this watch might have been a memory,
A keepsake, a symbol of something important.
to Lena, in that moment, it could be a way to save her son.
And honestly,
Who wouldn't think the same? But here's the strange part.
even as that thought formed, something inside her resisted it.
Not logically,
Not clearly.
just a quiet hesitation.
Like the watch wasn't just an object you could trade, like it carried something more than value.
Lena closed the cover gently.
The click echoed softly in the room, and for a second,
Everything felt still, too still.
I don't know how to explain that feeling properly, but I've experienced something similar before.
When a moment stretches just a little longer than it should.
When silence feels like it's waiting.
Lena looked around. The house hadn't changed.
Same walls, same furniture, same fading light.
And yet, it didn't feel exactly the same anymore.
She shook her head slightly, as if trying to clear the thought.
This could help, she whispered.
Not as a decision, more like a question she wasn't ready to answer. Carefully, she placed the watch into her bag. Not back under the table. Not where she found it. I think that matters. Because whether she realized it or not,
That was the moment she took something from the house. And maybe the house noticed.
evening settled in quietly. Lena moved through the rest of the tasks she had been putting off. Preparing something simple for the children to eat. Making sure they were warm. Creating some sense of routine in a place that still felt unfamiliar.
The normal things. The necessary things.
And slowly,
The weight of the day caught up with her.
by the time the children were asleep again,
Lena felt it in her bones.
that deep kind of exhaustion that doesn't just come from physical work, but from carrying too much for too long. She sat down for a moment.
Just a moment.
Her hand instinctively moved toward her bag. Toward the watch. She didn't take it out. But she knew it was there.
And strangely,
That awareness brought her a sense of calm. Not relief. Not hope.
just calm.
I found that part unsettling. Because objects don't usually do that. Unless they're not just objects.
Lena lay down beside her eldest daughter, the house quiet around her.
The night settling deeper. Her eyes closed almost instantly. Exhaustion finally winning.
And for the first time since arriving,
She slept. Deeply. Too deeply.
because when the sound came, it didn't feel like part of a dream. It felt real. A loud knock.
Sharp. Heavy. Once. Then again. And again. The kind of knock that doesn't ask to be let in. The kind that expects it.
Lena's eyes snapped open.
Her body reacting before her mind could catch up.
The house, just moments ago quiet,
Now felt completely different. Alive.
listening.
Waiting.
The first thing Lena noticed wasn't the sound.
It was the feeling. That sudden, sharp awareness that pulls you out of sleep before your mind even understands why. Her eyes opened into darkness. For a second, everything was still. Then, bang! The knock came again.
Heavy, deliberate.
Not the kind of knock someone makes when they're unsure. Not the kind you ignore and hope goes away. This was different. This was the kind of knock that assumes you're already on your way to the door. Lena didn't move immediately. Her body stayed still, instinct taking over. Listening. The children were still asleep. All 5 of them. That somehow made it worse.
Because if the sound was that loud, if it had pulled her out of deep sleep that quickly, why hadn't it woken them? I remember thinking about that detail longer than I should have.
Because it doesn't make sense, and when something doesn't make sense, it stays with you. Bang! Again. Closer this time. Or maybe just louder. Lena sat up slowly. Her heart had already started racing, but her face stayed still. That's another thing people don't talk about enough. Fear doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like control. She swung her feet onto the floor carefully, making sure not to make a sound. The wooden boards beneath her creaked slightly. The knock stopped. Just like that. Silence. Too sudden. Too complete. Lena froze. I don't know what you would do in that moment. Wait? Hide? Pretend you're not there? But Lena didn't have that luxury. 5 children. No locks she trusted. No neighbors close enough to call. If someone wanted to get in, they would. And maybe that's what pushed her to move. She stepped out into the hallway. Each step slow, controlled. The house felt different now. Not the quiet from before. This was heavier, like the walls were holding their breath. She reached the main room. The front door stood just ahead. Closed! Still. For a moment, Lena just stood there, staring at it. And I think this was the exact moment where everything could have gone differently. Because she had a choice. Turn back. Or open it. Most people would say, don't open the door. But those people don't have 5 children behind them. Those people aren't standing in a house with no real protection. Lena stepped forward. Her hand reached for the handle. Cold. She hesitated, just for a second, then turned it. The door opened with a slow, low creak. The night air rushed in first. Cool, damp, real. And then she saw him. An old man, standing just beyond the doorway. Thin frame, long gray beard, worn clothes that looked like they had seen years of use. He didn't look threatening, not in the way Lena had expected. If anything, he looked familiar. That's the part that unsettled me the most, because Lena had never seen him before. And yet, there was something about him that didn't feel like a stranger. He smiled. Not wide, not forced, just calm. Good evening, he said. His voice was soft. Steady. Too steady for someone standing outside a house in the middle of the night. Lena didn't answer right away. Her mind was still catching up, trying to make sense of the situation. You must be new here, the man continued, as if this was a normal conversation, as if the hour didn't matter. Lena finally found her voice. Yes, we just arrived today. The words felt strange as soon as she said them, because she hadn't told anyone. No neighbors, no locals, no one. So how did he know? The man nodded slowly, like he expected that answer. I thought so, he said. There was a pause. Then he added, This house doesn't stay empty for long. I don't know why that line stayed with me, but it did. Because it doesn't sound like a simple observation. It sounds like something else. Lena shifted slightly, her body still half blocking the doorway. Do you need something? She asked carefully. The man glanced past her, into the house, not in a rude way, not intrusive, just knowing. I was passing through, he said. The road's not good tonight. Thought I'd stop by, warm up a bit. That made sense, at least on the surface. The road was bad. The rain earlier had turned everything to mud, but something didn't sit right. Because the way he stood there, it didn't feel like someone asking for help. It felt like someone returning to a place they already knew. Still, what choice did Lena have? She stepped aside. Come in, she said. The man nodded once, grateful, but not surprised. He stepped inside. And that's when Lena noticed something she hadn't expected. He didn't look around. Not like someone entering a new place. He didn't hesitate, didn't pause, didn't take anything in. He walked forward, as if he already knew exactly where everything was. And somehow, that was more unsettling than the knock. Because this wasn't just a visitor. This was someone who had been here before. And as Lena slowly closed the door behind him, one thought settled quietly in her mind. She hadn't let a stranger into the house. She had let someone in who already belonged there. There's something deeply unsettling about being in your own space. And realizing someone else understands it better than you do, that's exactly what Lena felt the moment the old man stepped further inside. He didn't ask where to go, didn't hesitate, didn't even glance around like a guest would. He simply walked straight through the main room, past the table, toward the kitchen. like memory was guiding him. Lena followed a step behind, not close enough to confront him, but not far enough to lose sight of him either. I think that's what people do when they're unsure. They stay near the thing that makes them uncomfortable, just in case. The man reached the kitchen and pulled out a chair. Not randomly, not by chance. The exact chair Lena had noticed earlier, the one that had been slightly pulled back. He sat down slowly, comfortably, like he had done it 100 times before. Warm place? He said, looking around. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Lena stayed standing. I didn't expect anyone to come by, she said carefully. The man nodded, still calm, still composed. People don't usually, he replied. There was something about the way he spoke, not vague, not confusing, just layered, like every sentence meant more than it sounded like. Lena crossed her arms slightly, not defensive, but not relaxed either. How did you know we were here? She asked. The man didn't answer immediately. He reached for the kettle instead, lifted it, checked it, empty. He set it back down, then finally looked at her. You can tell when a house isn't empty anymore, he said. I paused when I first heard that line, because it sounds poetic, but also strange. How? Lena asked, a small smile, not mocking, not friendly either. Some places, he said slowly, they don't like being empty. Silence followed. And I think this is where most people would laugh it off, call it superstition, old beliefs. But Lena didn't, because nothing about this felt like a joke. The man leaned back slightly in his chair. His eyes moved across the room. Not searching, not curious, remembering. You moved in quickly, he said. It wasn't a question. Lena hesitated. Yes, another pause. And you didn't ask many questions. That one landed differently. Because it was true. Lena felt it immediately. That quiet discomfort. How do you know that? She asked. The man tilted his head slightly. Because the ones who ask questions, he said, don't stay. I don't know about you, but that would have been enough for me to ask him to leave. But Lena didn't. Not yet. Because something about him, despite everything, didn't feel dangerous. Unsettling, yes. Strange, definitely. But not threatening. And that made it harder. Because fear is easier to deal with when it's clear. This wasn't. It was something else. The man's gaze shifted again. This time, toward Lena's bag. The one she had placed near the wall. The one holding the watch. You found it, he said. Not asked. Said. Lena felt it instantly. That tightening in her chest. What do you mean? She asked, even though she already knew. The man's eyes returned to hers. The watch, he said simply. There it was. No hesitation. No guessing. He knew. I remember thinking, this is the moment everything changes. Because now, this wasn't coincidence anymore. How do you know about that? Lena asked, her voice quieter now, more controlled. The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table. That watch, he said, doesn't end up in someone's hand by accident. Lena didn't speak, because something in that sentence didn't feel like an opinion. It felt like a rule. The man studied her for a moment, not judging, not assessing, understanding. You felt it, didn't you? He asked. That question, it caught her off guard, because she had that strange calm, that hesitation, that sense that the object meant more than it should, but she hadn't said any of that out loud. So how did he know? I don't know what you're talking about, she replied. Not a lie. Not fully. Just not the whole truth. The man nodded slowly. Of course, he said. And for the first time, there was something in his expression that shifted. Not emotion, not exactly, but recognition. Like he had seen this before. People always say that at first, he added quietly. A small silence settled between them. And I think this is the moment Lena realized something important. This man wasn't just familiar with the house. He was connected to it in a way she didn't understand yet. And somehow, that connection included her now. The man leaned back again. You should be careful with it, he said. Why? Lena asked immediately. Another pause. And then, because not everything that can save you, he said softly, comes without a cost. That line stayed with me, because it doesn't sound like a warning. It sounds like something that has already happened. Lena didn't respond, but inside, something shifted again. Not fear. Not yet. But awareness. Because for the first time since arriving, she understood something clearly. This house wasn't just a place she had been given. It was something she had stepped into. Something with a past. And now, somehow, a future that involved her. There's a moment in every story where things stop feeling coincidental, where all the small, strange details you've been ignoring start lining up. For Lena, that moment had already begun. She just hadn't said it out loud yet. The old man sat quietly at the table, his presence no longer surprising, but somehow heavier now that she understood it wasn't random. The house was silent again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt aware. Lena finally moved. Slowly, carefully, she walked to her bag, reached inside, and pulled out the watch. For a brief second, she hesitated, not because she was afraid to show it, but because something inside her told her this wasn't something you simply hand over. Still, she placed it on the table, between them. The metal caught the dim light. Quiet, still. The old man looked at it, not with curiosity, not with surprise, but with recognition, like seeing something that had never really been gone. I thought so, he said softly. Lena didn't sit. She stayed standing. You know what this is, she said. Again, not a question. The man nodded. Yes? Silence followed. And I think this is where Lena stopped pretending this was normal. Then tell me, she said. Her voice wasn't loud. But it wasn't uncertain either. It was the kind of voice that comes when you've reached your limit of not knowing. The man leaned forward slightly, his fingers resting near the watch but not touching it. This house, he began, doesn't belong to people the way other houses do. I remember pausing there. Because that sentence changes everything. Lena didn't interrupt. People think they inherit it, he continued. They think they've been given something. His eyes lifted to hers. But that's not how it works. Another pause. They're chosen. There it was. The word Lena hadn't wanted to think. Chosen. I've always found that word complicated because it sounds like something positive, special. But it also carries something else, responsibility. And sometimes a cost. Chosen for what? Lena asked. The man glanced at the watch. For what it represents. That doesn't explain anything, Lena replied. And she was right. So the man did something unexpected. He reached out, and this time, he touched the watch. Just lightly, the moment his fingers made contact. Lena felt it, that same shift, but stronger. Not in the room, inside her. A memory, not hers. A flash, too quick to fully see, too real to ignore. She stepped back slightly, her breath catching. What was that? She whispered. The man didn't react to her fear, because it wasn't fear. It was recognition. This house, he said quietly, has seen lives saved and lives lost. His fingers moved away from the watch. And that, he added, was never just a gift. Lena stared at it. The engraving suddenly felt heavier. To the one who saved a life? What does that mean? She asked. The man exhaled slowly. It means someone made a choice, he said. What kind of choice? This time, the pause was longer. The kind that tells you the answer matters. The kind, he said finally, where saving one life changes another. I don't think Lena understood it completely in that moment, but she felt it, that quiet realization that this wasn't about the past. It was about her. Why me? She asked. Not desperate, not emotional, just honest. The man looked at her carefully. Because you're already standing at that point, he said. That landed immediately. Because he was right. 5 children, one of them sick. A decision coming that she couldn't avoid. How do you know that? She asked. The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he said something else. Everyone who comes here, he said, comes when they have nothing left to lose. And something they can't afford to lose. I remember thinking, that's exactly where Lena was. And maybe that's why she had been brought here, not to escape, but to face something. Lena looked at the watch again. And for the first time, she didn't see value. She saw weight. So what happens now? She asked. The man stood up slowly. his movements calm, unhurried. That depends, he said. On what?
He met her eyes.
On what you're willing to give? To save what you can't lose. Silence.
Heavy. Unavoidable.
Because now, it wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a choice.
And Lena knew,
Even if she didn't fully understand it yet, she wouldn't be able to walk away from it.
the man moved toward the door, like his part of the conversation was finished.
Like he had said exactly what needed to be said. Before leaving, he paused, just for a second.
And without turning back, he added,
Not every price looks like a loss at first. Then he stepped outside and disappeared into the night.
Lena stood there alone.
The house quiet again. But not the same. Never the same. She looked down at the watch, and for the first time since finding it, she understood something clearly.
This wasn't something she had found. This was something that had found her.